Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. U.S. and Iranian negotiators have begun indirect negotiations in Geneva over Iran's nuclear program after President Trump ordered the largest deployment of U.S. forces to the Middle East since the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Ahead of the talks, the Trump administration imposed new sanctions on 30 people accused of enabling Iran's oil sales and weapons production. This comes as Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, is claiming Iran has enough fissile material to make a nuclear bomb within days. But several nuclear experts say Iran's nuclear program hasn't advanced since the U.S. and Israeli military struck them last June. This is Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi.
We were negotiating last June when Israel attacked us, and then the U.S. joined that attack. So that memory is still fresh for us. The wounds of that aggression is still alive in our minds. So we cannot forget that once we negotiating with the U.S. and then they decided to attack us.
Meanwhile, independent journalist Aida Chavez is reporting that Democratic lawmakers on the House Foreign Affairs Committee are trying to prevent a vote on an Iran war powers resolution sponsored by Congress members Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie. The bill would require every member of Congress to go on the record about a potential U.S. war with Iran. 4 Cuban exiles were killed Wednesday in a shootout between Cuban border guards and a U.S. speedboat carrying 10 Cuban exiles. According to the Cuban government, the men on the Florida-registered speedboat opened fire when Cuban forces approached the boat for an inspection off the northeast coast of Cuba. The Cuban guards then fired back, killing 4 of the men. 6 others were injured or now being held in Cuba in hospital. The Cuban government says the men were attempting to carry out, quote, an infiltration with terrorist ends, unquote. Cuban media reports the men were carrying weapons, Molotov cocktails, bulletproof jackets, and camouflage gear. On Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the U.S. will investigate what happened. Rubio was speaking at a gathering of Caribbean leaders who expressed alarm over the growing humanitarian crisis in Cuba due to the U.S. oil blockade that's cut off the island from desperately needed fuel. On Wednesday, 2 Mexican Navy ships departed from Veracruz with over 1,000 tons of humanitarian aid for Cuba. Russian officials say they're discussing the possibility of providing fuel to Cuba. And on Wednesday, Canada became the latest country to pledge food aid to Cuba. We'll have more on this story after headlines with Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, who's helping to organize a humanitarian solidarity mission to Cuba next month. She's just back from the island. Dozens of international aid organizations have made a final appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court to prevent a de facto ban on their operations in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, set to take effect in early March. The 37 international groups, including Oxfam and Doctors Without Borders, collectively provide more than half of all food assistance in Gaza, operate the majority of field hospitals, and run all inpatient treatment for children suffering severe acute malnutrition. This comes amidst a surge of violence by Israeli soldiers and settlers targeting Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. On Tuesday, settlers set fire to vehicles and tents in the Palestinian village of Susia. This is resident Ahmed Al-Nawajeh.
We were shocked when around 30 settlers arrived. They were carrying incendiary materials and burned this tent and that one. They burned the chicken coop. They burned all the furniture. They left nothing.
The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem says it'll offer passport and consular services to U.S. citizens in 2 Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. It's the first time the State Department's offered such services, a move the Palestinian Authority condemned as a, quote, clear violation of international law and a blatant favoring of the occupation authorities, unquote. A New York Times review finds key documents related to a woman who accused Donald Trump of assaulting her when she was a minor, are missing from the Justice Department's release of the Epstein files. The missing documents are comprised of FBI memos summarizing interviews the agency conducted with the woman in 2019. She spoke to the FBI after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and claimed she'd been sexually assaulted by both Donald Trump and Epstein in the 1980s when she was just 13 years old. The Times notes, according to the index of the Epstein files, the FBI conducted 4 interviews with the woman and provided summaries of each interview, but only one of the summaries, which details her accusation against Epstein, was released by the Justice Department. On Wednesday, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers said he'll resign as a professor at Harvard University at the end of the semester over his ties to Epstein. Summers had previously served as president of Harvard. Summers had been on leave since last November after the Harvard Crimson student newspaper detailed how Summers had asked Epstein for relationship advice, how to have an affair with a person he was mentoring. Meanwhile, Bob Kerrey, the former Democratic senator from Nebraska, resigned from his role as chair of the company Monolith over his ties to Epstein. Nobel laureate Richard Axel also announced his resignation as co-director of Columbia University's Neuroscience Institute over his association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The president and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Borja Brenda, said he was resigning after the forum launched an independent investigation into his relationship with Epstein. Meanwhile, Bill Gates has apologized to his staff of the charitable foundation over his ties to Epstein. Gates also acknowledged he had 2 affairs with Russian women that Epstein later discovered. According to a recording obtained by the Wall Street Journal, Gates admitted he first met with Epstein in 2011, years after Epstein had pleaded guilty in 2008 to soliciting a minor for prostitution. A federal judge has ruled the Trump administration's policy of deporting immigrants to third countries to which they have no ties is unlawful. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Brian Murphy said that immigrants challenging the Department of Homeland Security's policy have the right to meaningful notice and can object before they're deported to a third country. In Buffalo, New York, a disabled Rohingya refugee from Burma has been found dead after he was abandoned by Border Patrol agents about 5 miles from his home. 56-year-old Nurul Amin Shah Alam was mostly blind and spoke no English. His family told reporters no one at the Department of Homeland Security warned them or his lawyers that he'd been released from jail and dropped off alone outside a coffee shop on a cold winter night. Minnesota Congressmember Ilhan Omar is demanding an investigation into the arrest of her guest at the State of the Union Tuesday night. Alia Rahman was removed from the House chamber and jailed, all for standing silently during President Trump's speech. She described her arrest on Democracy Now!
I was not just removed and arrested. I was arrested so physically that 2 other attendees upstairs attempted to intervene in officers pulling on my shoulders after I told them I have a torn rotator cuff tendon and multiple cartilage tears in both of my shoulders.
In a statement, Minneapolis Congressmember Ilhan Omar wrote, quote, "The heavy-handed response to a peaceful guest sends a chilling message about the state of our democracy," unquote. Alia Rahman is a U.S. citizen. She was injured last month when federal immigration agents smashed her car window in Minneapolis and dragged her out of her car. She's autistic, reportedly telling them she was disabled repeatedly. She was detained at the Whipple Federal Building and later released without charge. The Trump administration announced Wednesday it's freezing more than $250 million in Medicaid reimbursements to the state of Minnesota. In announcing the move, Vice President J.D. Vance cited a fraud scandal that's been linked to a handful of Somali Americans in Minneapolis. Nearly 1.3 million people in Minnesota receive some form of Medicaid coverage, or about a quarter of all state residents. In a statement, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz condemned the Trump administration's actions, writing, quote, "The agents Trump allegedly sent to investigate fraud are shooting protesters and arresting children. His DOJ is gutting the U.S. Attorney's Office and crippling their ability to prosecute fraud. And every week, Trump pardons another fraudster," unquote. President Trump's nominee to become the next U.S. Surgeon General appeared before the Senate Health, Education, Labor and Pensions Committee on Wednesday, where she declined to encourage parents to have their kids vaccinated against measles and influenza. Casey Means is a wellness influencer, author, and entrepreneur. She and her brother, Callie Means, are key figures in the Make America Healthy Again movement, advisors to Health Secretary RFK Jr. during his 2024 presidential campaign. Casey Means has a medical degree from Stanford University, but did not complete her surgical residency and allowed her medical license to expire in 2024. Under questioning from Senator Tim Kaine, Means repeatedly refused to state whether she agreed with Health Secretary RFK Jr. that there's no evidence flu vaccines prevent serious disease.
A mountain of evidence about this. Do you believe that there's no evidence that the flu vaccine has efficacy in reducing serious injury or hospitalization? This is an easy one, doctor. This is an easy one.
I support the CDC's guidance on the flu vaccine, and I will always be working with the CDC, ACIP, and the agencies.
So you believe it is an efficacious vaccine to reduce hospitalization? And
is or is not?
Is. You believe it is?
So as I said, I support the CDC's guidance on the flu vaccine.
Let me just say.
The artificial intelligence company Anthropic is dropping its core safety pledge and scaling its AI models. The company's reversal comes after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued an ultimatum to Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei to grant the Pentagon full access to the company's AI models by Friday. Hegseth reportedly threatened to cancel a $200 million Pentagon contract and to declare Anthropic a supply chain risk, and even said he might invoke the Defense Production Act to force the company to tailor its AI models for military use. Amodei had previously warned against the use of artificial intelligence to help the U.S. government conduct mass surveillance and develop autonomous weapons. This comes as NBC News reports that in December, Anthropic agreed to allow the U.S. government to use its AI systems for missile and cyber defense purposes. And Brazil's Supreme Court has sentenced 5 men to prison terms after convicting them of plotting the 2018 assassination of Rio de Janeiro City Councilwoman Marielle Franco and her driver, Anderson Gomes. Among those found guilty were former Congress member Chiquinho Blasio and his brother Domingos. Marielle Franco is a black lesbian known for her fierce criticism of police killings in Brazil's impoverished favela neighborhoods. On Wednesday, her widow, Monica Benicio, celebrated the Brazilian Supreme Court's unanimous ruling.
Marielle se torna símbolo, mas porque a sociedade assim o fez.
Marielle becomes a symbol, but because society has made her so, because it believes that this country can be much better than it is now. Justice for Marielle is not a slogan, it's a life task. It's the fight for building a society where people like Marielle and Anderson can live, flourish, and never be murdered for being who they are. And that's the message we leave here today, written in the history of Brazilian democracy.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.